And good afternoon to all of the internet people out there watching today's video. I'm here in Binghamton, New York, where today the weather is actually for what, June 16th? It's kind of cold out, and I don't know if I'm going to go out with the dog. Sometimes I don't go out with the dog when it's too cold. But anyway, what we're going to do today is we're going to talk a little bit about personal branding, and we're going to talk about, I don't know, Dorothea and I go back and we might just go off on a tangent and talk about fun things that I guarantee will teach you something in today's video on smart conversations. Dorothea, welcome.
Thank you so much. It's been an honor to know you for many years, Yvonne, and now to be present on your video cast. I won't call it podcast because when you think of pod, you immediately think of just your ear.
Yeah.
But there's a lot that's been going on in social audio, among other things. And thank you so much for touching upon one of the areas of my business, personal branding. But I'm hoping that we get a chance to talk about marketing strategy and
that would be awesome.
But I'll wait for you to properly introduce me because I know we have been practicing my name.
Yes, I have, and I'm going to see if I can do it right because, ladies and gentlemen, you know, one of the things that is really important when you're doing something like a podcast or a video cast like I am is trying at least to learn the guest's name properly. And Dorothea, I look at your name and it's such a beautiful name. It kind of intimidates me, but let me tell the audience a little bit more. Dorothéa Bozicolona-Volpe was born in New York City to French and Italian parents. Her father's passing caused her family to move to Europe, where she became somewhat of a nomad. She has lived in Italy, France, Germany, Japan, Sweden, and Netherlands, and the United Kingdom. Wow. She's a strategic digital marketing executive. She's fluent in 4 languages. I really want to know what those 4 languages are, and specializes in developing business through digital, influencer, and social media marketing for the world's most memorable brands. She teaches marketers and business leaders how to increase value and develop strong relationships between brands and fans. And that's a good place for me to kind of move this into the whole idea of fans. Talk a little bit about that, because I think small business owners especially don't think that they can ever have fans. Can we have fans even if we're just a small business?
Well, of course you can. What I mean by fans and how I define it is audiences. So kind of think in your mind's eye, fans equal audiences. Audiences can be anything, you know, they can be the person you do business with. They could also be your audience that is absorbing your content and sharing it. On Instagram, I always do a thing on Monday called Monday Motivation, and you're familiar with it because we're following one another on Instagram.
Yes.
I always start out with dear friends, fans, and followers, because some people are just fans. They're fans of your content. They may never take any action. If you remember years ago, Josh Bernoff and Charlene Lee, 2 Forrester consultants and analysts, wrote a book called Groundswell. And in Groundswell, it really talked about the dawn of new media, what we now call social media, and how there are a great number of people, almost 90% of the people who even utilize social media platforms at all, they're looky-loos. They're just there to look and be a fan. They may never comment. They just enjoy reading the content, just like you have people who watch your video casts and read your posts and what have you that may never do the same. But there are also in that 10 percentile, right? People who are content makers. You'll hear that a lot, content makers. We've heard that term, you know, parried about a lot. And then you also have people who are commenters, critics, right? And if you kind of think about the Groundswell ladder, and now let's fast forward, because that book was written, as you know, in the early 2000s, in the early aughts. And here we are in 2021. When you think about the utilization of social media now, you know, some people are going there for their news. Some are going there for specific information.
Right.
So you have fans or audiences of specific type of content. I tell my personal branding clients, people may comment on your blog that never follow you on Twitter. People may go every Thursday when you post your very special, vlog on YouTube and tune in, that may never follow you or comment on Instagram or connect with you on LinkedIn. Be mindful that all of these people make up your audiences, make up your fans, whether they're doing business with you or not. It's just like years ago when people would say, oh, well, we only do business in North America. Well, the moment you put a website up, you're a global company. Anybody can tap into that, right? Anyone can see your content, whether they're in Russia, India, or Indiana.
But Dorothea, I have to ask you a question then. When we try and teach our clients to describe an avatar in their audience, we want them to kind of drill down. We're not trying to get them to look at the entire world, although I totally agree with you that everyone's a worldwide business when you're on the web. How do you teach them to do that and then still look at the bigger picture?
So in my practice, I teach something called sociotechnography. And what that basically is really understanding the on and offline behaviors of your perfect customer. And we create what's called a customer persona from that. And you may have several personas. You may have a decision maker in one type of company that is somebody in procurement, right? You may have a decision maker in another company that might land with a title in the C-suite, like a chief operating officer, or perhaps somebody who is a chief marketing officer. So it's really important that, to your point, you drill down and you understand where are they? The godfather of all modern marketing, Peter Drucker. I love quoting this one quote from him. You're nodding your head because we all studied Peter Drucker in school. Didn't matter how old or young you were, because the man was just prolific and brilliant. He's no longer with us, God rest his soul. But he said, you want to be there at the moment of truth, the right message to the right person at the right time, right? But I'm going to add something to that. I also believe in the right modality. More and more, we're on our mobile phones, right? More and more, we're on this. So if you understand that your communication has to be as such that you're going to be communicating now in a small window, right? And that you've got only a couple of seconds of time to get somebody's, attention. So that's when sociotechnography really counts, because understanding not just where that person is and at what time of day, but also what modality they're utilizing for communication. Are they on a laptop? Are they on a work PC? Are they on a mobile phone or a tablet? Your communication has to be something that they can see rather quickly. If you remember correctly, one of the things that I taught at Blog Post, your old haunt, your company, and it was such a great honor for me to give one of the first ever Pinterest keynote. Yeah, it was great. And I think because I really believe that at the time, and obviously this was well over a decade ago, if you remember, Pinterest was really in beta.
Yes.
Instagram was 9 months old, and I was pushing this idea of social visual communication, a phrase coined by our good friend Toby Bloomberg, but I defined it more deeply in that I was sharing with companies and even individuals that had their own blog or their own small business, right? Because these were predominantly pet bloggers, if I remember correctly. Yep. The really important thing that you need to understand is that each of these platforms is its own ecosystem. Twitter is so different from Facebook, wouldn't you agree?
Yes.
And then you think about, everybody tries to compare TikTok to Instagram. They're two totally different ecosystems. Right. And it saddens me when I see a brand post the same type of content on Facebook, on Twitter, because they're different ecosystems. One might be more visual. One might have an audience base that is more socially, visually aligned, right? And that's why back then I remember starting, and it was not your conference, but it was another conference I did in San Francisco. And it was to a bunch of CMOs and managing directors of brands and SVPs of brands who, they know a lot about marketing, don't you know, because they work for these big companies and so on and so forth. And that's wonderful. But I remember starting my keynote by saying, how many folks in this room, and I'll never forget, it was 2010, have read a case study beginning to end? You downloaded it, you read it beginning to end in the last month. Please raise your hand. And not one hand went up. And then I asked the question, how many of you have learned something about a brand, a product, a service, even a DIY project by reading an infographic or watching a video in the last month? Please raise your hand. And every hand went up.
Yeah.
And I shared with them that we live in the dawn of social visual communication. People want to learn things quickly. So as you're thinking about building your audience, it's really important that you also think modality first, right? And then, and what runs right parallel to that is relevancy. We used to hear it all the time. Content is king, content is king.
Mhm.
And people would write content for content's sake. Well, maybe you don't need to write content for content's sake on everything. Maybe it's okay to tease a little bit that you've got a book coming out,
Yeah.
or that you're launching a new video cast or a new podcast, or that you're launching a new newsletter. Maybe it's okay to be, hold your cards a little bit close to your chest. And I'm not saying that's good for every brand, but what I'm saying is that I think it's really important that we understand that relevancy is king, right?
Yeah.
Content is queen, but above all, know the modality that it's being transported in.
This is really powerful. I don't think I've heard anyone else talk about it this way quite, because I have been and am guilty of I put something on Facebook and then I put it on Instagram. I put it on Twitter and then I put it on LinkedIn. And I think about the audience. So the content is relevant to the audience that I'm trying to reach, but this is really very powerful to think about the modality. And would you say then that we need to be paying really close attention to kind of how our audience is consuming it, the way you just talked about, but learning more about that in a way that we can understand it? Because I love your point just a minute ago, especially for authors, because I work with authors now. And I constantly am saying to them, all right, let's talk about where we're going to tease this out. Let's talk about when we're going to give a little hint that you're writing this book. What should we tell people? But now I'm going to be thinking even more carefully about the different messages and where they go.
Right.
And how people then are reading them and absorbing them.
Right. Because to your point, audiences react differently. You've got a totally different audience on Twitter that you do on Facebook. We'll go back to my personal branding practice. They may have people who read their blogs day in and day out and just follow them like crazy on Instagram, but will never connect with them or do business with them on LinkedIn, and vice versa. And it doesn't matter if you're a B2B or a B2C brand, you must think audience first, right? And then the modalities that they're utilizing so that you understand how to communicate. Anne Hanley, who I'm a huge fan of, she did Everybody Writes, so the book, she's a prolific writer herself, the owner of Marketing Profs. And I'm very honored that I had the opportunity to speak in a Marketing Profs online webinar. I think this was more than a handful of Thanksgivings ago. And I talked on community building, because that's also an area of my practice. And one of the things that Anne always talks about is that, you got to be universal enough that you can get people's attention, but you also have to be focused enough that they get what you're saying.
Yes.
In a way, I'm paraphrasing her a little bit, because I'm sure what she said was much more, she articulated probably better and was much more prolific. But I think there's some truth to that. If you do want to get people's attention, yes, at times you do have to go broad into your industry or the subject matter. But then when you want to get focused, right, and you get them to finally to read the content or consume the content, whether it's a video, an infographic, a blog post, an image, it's really important that you make it relevant in a way that no matter where they're coming from, whether it be a mobile phone or a laptop, that they can read it, they can see it, and it's going to resonate with them, right?
And yes, I think you said earlier, it was very telling, the length, and people want short, quick, easy to consume content on the web, on their phone, on their laptop, or whatever. How does that relate then to my authors who are writing books? And this is a lot more content than you're talking about.
Exactly. So let's talk about short and quick for a moment. I appreciate that that's the way that you defined it. What I would say is relevant.
Okay.
And I would also say, like the vaccinations we're all getting right now, rapid release, right? These mNRA. Think about content like mNRA. If I had a book, and let's say, I'll be very hypothetical here. Let's say it's a book on installing Windows, right?
Mhm.
I'd want to first talk about, what is it that makes me an expert on installing Windows? And I would spend an inordinate amount of time making sure that people knew, having, maybe being a guest blogger on a DIY site, or writing for the Home Depot, excuse me, or writing on, another website like Angie's sure used to be called Angie's List, but Angie's, to make myself first a noted authority on Windows and window installation. And then over time, share with the audience maybe, hey, here's an excerpt from my book.
Mhm.
And, this is just something that I want you to be aware of, because this is foundational if you're planning on being a window installer, right?
Mhm.
I think there's a way, just like we've heard of email drip campaigns, there's also
Yes.
content drip campaigns.
Okay.
And what
Yeah.
you put out on one channel might be very different on another. You may do a full-blown blog post on the Home Depot's, guest blogging site, again, being hypothetical.
Mhm.
But then on a Instagram, you may do a reel on how to install a window. And in 7-8 seconds, be able to show somebody in an Instagram reel, this is how you install a window. Needless to say, it might take 6 hours to do. You're doing snippet to snippet on a reel, right?
Mhm.
But I think it's just very unique in that you understand the modality,
Mhm.
and then understand how your content fits that modality. Not all content, okay, in the case of your authors, fits the modality. But I will say, if I were a poetess, as you know, I think it was April was Poetry Month.
Mhm.
How cool would it be if you had a book and then you tweeted out little excerpts of poems to get people to buy your book?
Well, yeah, I definitely, that's exactly the kind of thing that we want to do. Plus video trailers. And I think for authors, generally speaking, up until most recently, a video trailer came out when the book was launched. So here's my book is done, here's my video trailer. Well, I want my authors to do video trailers throughout the writing of the book. I want them to do these little snippets you're talking about and share them wherever they can share them. Is video something that also has to change with how you share it in those different modalities?
I'm going to answer your question in 2 parts, if that's okay.
Okay, yes.
One, I think it's brilliant that you tell your authors to take people on their journey.
Yeah.
I get excited about something. I'm a huge fan of Ava DuVernay and Regina King, both directors and writers and just content producers, right?
Yep.
And I love it when I follow them on social media and I'm part of their process as an audience member,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that makes me want to tune in. Regina King did her directorial debut with, I think it's called One Night in Miami, which was sort of a thought up, interaction between Muhammad Ali when he was still Cassius Clay, Malcolm X,
Yeah.
Jim Brown, and I think the other guy,
Oh my God,
me,
yes.
the famous singer at the time. It'll come to me before the end of your podcast, I hope. And I think the thing that was so interesting about that is that I felt like I was part of their community. I feel as though I'm part of their community. And I also felt like I was part of the journey. Now, your question, what had to do with modality.
Yeah.
I think that every modality is different. YouTube, you can go long form. You can also use Vimeo for that. Vimeo has, and I'm not trying to promote it at all, but I'm a big fan of the fact that they have a professional version so that you can see the analytics, and it goes a little bit deeper, I think, than just posting something to post something on YouTube. Instagram and TikTok are a little bit different. So is Pinterest.
Yeah.
Pinterest is very aspirational. You might have an image of yourself, let's say, tapping away at your computer, or if you use a IBM Selectric or typewriter. On Instagram, you have many options: hyperlapse. You have reels. You have Instagram television. You've got a post. You've got stories. You can even write a guide about your timeline for your book, or maybe the chapters in your book. TikTok, I think, is something that, again, highly visual, very fast absorption, again, and that might be a fun thing for you just to do storytelling, But be mindful that all of these modalities allow you to establish yourself as an expert. So if you've got a very focused book that you're writing a how-to or a best of, or here's what my story and how I learned about something, I think it's really important to understand the modality and how you're utilizing it. And this is well before the book launch, right? To establish yourself as an industry thought leader. Allows you to have a larger, what I like to call digital footprint, and gives your name a little bit of, it gives it wings, right?
Yeah.
It allows it to get, and here's the other thing too, by being on these other modalities, it allows you to have the opportunity to get to know new audiences and introduce yourself to them, right?
Yeah.
No matter what, your subject matter is, there's somebody out there that is an audience for it. I remember in the early days of new media, now I'm talking the 90s, right?
Yeah.
Because I was working in law enforcement at the time. We didn't talk about that part in my bio. And I was so fascinated by what was happening in these electronic bulletin boards, and that those were if you remember correctly, those were the godfathers of now what we call blogs.
Yep, exactly.
And I was involved in them both for my work life and in my personal life. And my TED Talk talks a lot about how I met these people all over the world that helped me through, as you know, a dire situation.
Yes.
But the thing that I was so fascinated by, and just kind of shook my head and scratched my head every day, and caused me to write that white paper that was the kickoff of my career on the social object, which was that people were connecting over content. So if they were on World of Warcraft, and again, this is the early days of the internet, so that AOL was known as the wall garden for dating and Messenger, remember?
Right,
Yahoo was where you went because it was a search engine, and everybody had a Yahoo or a Hotmail account, right?
Yep.
But you went on things like Prodigy and CompuServe, and you would see these electronic bulletin boards. Let's use the subject of Italy. We both have Italian roots, right? People would talk about Italy, and all of a sudden the social object was Italy, but somebody was talking about shoes, another one food, somebody was talking about their holiday, their vacation with their wife for their anniversary, another person was, waxing poetic about a summer that they spent backpacking around Italy, right? So that they could, that next year start university. So I think that there's a lot to be said about the social object and content being something that can connect you with your audiences. Think about the chefs, these little chefs that nobody knew, right? Who started their own little YouTube channel. And now, there's a blonde lady who I just think is adorable, and her name now escapes me, so forgive me. Started a YouTube channel. She was a chef. She graduated, I think, from the Culinary Institute of America. Couldn't find a restaurant to go work in. I think this was probably like around 2008, 2009. Started her own YouTube channel, and now she's on the cooking channel or chef's channel with her own show.
Oh, yeah.
And I think there's more than one instance that you and I probably know of where somebody started out with a blog.
Yeah, look at the Pioneer Woman.
Yeah.
Pioneer Woman is the huge example that I use, because she was just this writing about her food and whatnot, and living on this ranch and had these animals. And, I have a client and who was in a similar situation where I'm like, this is your opportunity. Let's talk about the ways that you can get this content out, exactly what you're talking about, Dorothea, that shows her personality, her authenticity, who she is, because people want that community. Let's go back to that. People want that community. The author needs to build a community. The new small business owner needs to build a community. It's not just about setting up shop and selling something.
Everybody had to start somewhere. If you think about it, community is one of those things that, oh my word, when I say the word Margaret, or I say the name Margaret Atwood, you immediately think, The Handmaid's Tale.
Yep, at this stage you do, yeah.
Yeah, but she was also somebody who way back in the day did a movie about it, and now Hulu's done this blockbuster. I think they're on season 3 now. I've not watched one of them because, having read the book, I have to tell you, it scares the daylights out of me. So I don't know.
I've watched all of them there.
Okay, that's a conversation for another podcast, video cast. But then there's another person that I'm a big fan of, Susan Orlean, the woman who wrote The Orchid Thief. And that ultimately became a book. But if you remember, she was building this really sort of interesting community around her writing, because she was looking really at things from an anthropological perspective. If you remember in the book, Orchid Thief, she talks about, you know, the Seminole Indians in Florida and how this very specific orchid was being, these rare orchids were being poached by outsiders and on a reserve. And she talked about that. If I'm not mistaken, Nicolas Cage, I think, played the lead character in that book. And I found it so fascinating. We have a mutual friend in Elisa Camahort Page.
Yeah.
Here's somebody who started, a co-founder of BlogHer, who started something because she was just really passionate about it.
Yep.
And now look at it. I mean, BlogHer has become a juggernaut. And she continued on in her world and continued to write books about the things she's most passionate about, which predominantly are around political causes.
Right, right. Well, and I think to the point that we're trying to make here, one of the things that came to mind while you were talking is one of my favorite authors, Nora Lofts or Nora, it's one of the Noras. There's two that I read, but she primarily would write romantic fiction, romantic stories.
Oh, you're talking about Nora Ephron?
No, not Nora Ephron. Then she got into mysteries and police stories, and she writes there as J.D. Robb. So J.D. Robb stories are so completely removed from Nora Lofts that you would be fooled if at some point she came out and said, just like Stephen King did this, he wrote books under a pseudonym, and I don't remember what it is, that were different than, but his were a little more similar. He stayed kind of in the same vein, just with a different name for some reason, but she didn't. And so we're talking about two separate audiences that she had to, because she didn't say, oh, I'm going to now go write under this name, J.D. Robb, please go buy my books. So it's very fascinating. That, of course, now people who know that she is both, we don't care. We just read both.
Right. I think you brought up an interesting point. I think that, actually, I know this. We're not made up of just one passion.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I always tell people, you know, I'm very passionate about cooking. It's something that I learned when I was very little from my Nona Volpe. But I also really have a passion for music and obviously for my work, for marketing strategy. I always joke around and say that social espionage should have a tagline that says, we find revenue where revenue didn't exist, because I find audiences for brands where they didn't know they had them. Exactly. Because I help them get closer to how their content can make a change. I need to go back to something we talked about one night in Miami, and it being Regina King's directorial debut. It was Cassius Clay, Jim Brown, Sam Cooke, and Malcolm X. Okay, so with us, but it was Sam Cooke. So I just wanted to share that. But again, you know, Regina King is known as that very supportive wife to Cuba Gooding Jr. and Jerry Maguire. Yeah. And then she leverages that and gets involved with HBO. And, you know, Regina is known for creating content for HBO. And then she gets this really cool deal with Amazon to, you know, direct One Night in Miami. And this is somebody who obviously has a love of being an actress or actor. She has a love of her craft, but she's also a storyteller. And I think that that's the thing that makes Regina King very unique. She is, as I dare say, like all of us, made up of a lot of passions. And I think that that's something that, well, I think that's something we all should explore. You know, you look at people who are what I call multi-hyphenate, and I've got a client that's one, but I'm under an NDA and cannot talk about him publicly. But what I can say is that there are a lot of multi-hyphenate people. Look at Elon Musk. He's a guy who got into, you know, the idea behind solar energy and batteries. And lo and behold, you know, a car company, a company that has to do with space flight, and now the Boring Company, that they're literally trying to make high-speed trains that will connect people to Los Angeles from Northern California. Right. And ultimately, even there's been talk Las Vegas. So
Dorothea, let me just kind of, we're at the end of our time coming up, but something you said just a minute ago, the word storytelling. So for me, for my authors, for the people that I work with and connect with, regardless of whether they're writing a book, sometimes they're just starting a small business, and I'm a serial entrepreneur, so I can help them with that. But in the end, it's always about the story. We're
Yeah.
human beings, and the thing comes down to, what is the story? What is your story? What is my story? How do we connect them together and build something that is going to help us engage with each other, support each other, and those kinds of things? So story and storytelling is really kind of at the foundation. Would you agree with that, or?
Oh, I agree with that 100%. Stories can be told in a lot of different ways, content-wise. Arthur Brisbane, the world famous for making the quote, or saying the quote in 1912. He was an Australian newspaper editor and owner. He owned newspapers, I think, in Australia and New Zealand. And he said, a picture's worth 1,000 words. Yes, it's great to have a picture, and it can do a lot in storytelling, but doesn't it make you want to read the copy even more?
Well, you just,
Yes.
the saying itself, a picture's worth 1,000 words. You have to have words.
Yeah, you have to
convey the meaning
exactly.
or what you feel about the picture without the words. And even as you're looking at it, your brain is coming up with the words.
Yeah, and I think it's another reason why people are very attracted to podcasts, because they can listen, but they can also read. And I go back to my favorite, Fresh Air with Terry Gross. She's my spirit animal. I love her. I think there's a lot to be said about how, again, the written word. I mean, there's a reason why the Bible is still being printed and published, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not to sound, too.
Well, words matter.
Yeah, words matter.
And when you write them down, you're making a statement. And it's the reason that when you write a book, the general public thinks you're smart. It could be an awful book. It could be a terrible book. Well, you've written a book. You must be smart.
It's a tremendous accomplishment, though, right? It's a tremendous accomplishment.
Right.
Yeah.
So, well, Dorothea, man, I guess we could go on and on about this. You have such a rich experience background in all of this, and you're so well traveled, which really helps, because those of us who are stuck in our little house, I've never been out of the United States other than to go to Canada. So, I don't know other countries. Tom keeps wanting me to go to Ireland with him, and I would, but there's this big body of water you have to fly over. So I'm not really fond of that idea. But I really appreciate that you could share with us, help us. You've really come up with some great points and ideas and things that I can take now to my authors. And I know that anyone watching will have learned something. This is exactly why I do Smart Conversations, because in the conversation, we always uncover these little nuggets of beauty.
Yeah, I agree. There was a really great quote on travel that I wanted to share with you, because I think it encapsulates sort of how I feel. I'm trying to find it, actually, so kind of bear with me for a moment.
No problem. I mean, travel is, it's funny. I did a Smart Conversation a few weeks ago with a woman who went to she went to the mountains in Nepal.
Mm-hmm.
And she talked about her experiences there. She talked about, you would appreciate this, she talked about deciding to go on this trip by herself and flying into Italy, and they lost her luggage. And so when she got to her destination, people were lending her clothes. She said every day it was Dress Melanie Day. What are we going to give Melanie to wear today? And it was just phenomenal, because you go across the world and people are just like the people here. They're friendly. They want to know you. They want to hear your story. They want to share their story. And we're missing out if we don't take the time to listen.
So there's two quotes I want to share with you when
Excellent.
you think about travel. I can't find the one that I really wanted, so forgive me, but there's one that really kind of encapsulates how I feel about it. Travel really makes one modest. You see what a tiny place you occupy in the world. And it's anonymous, I don't know who quoted it, but I think it says a lot about your girlfriend, you know, arriving in Italy without any clothing. And it's a very humbling experience, right? It's to some degree humiliating because you don't have clothes and that kind of thing. But I also think that traveling, and this is my own take on it, it turns you into a storyteller. You have experiences, right? You have an adventure. And I think it's also, while humbling, I think it's, oh goodness me, I think it's something that also allows you to be more broad-minded. And I found my quote: "The world is a book, and those who do not travel read only one page."
Yes, I know that quote.
Since you have authors, I thought that would resonate.
That's
with you.
so perfect. And that is a wonderful way to conclude today. Dorothea, I cannot thank you enough. This has been so much fun. And every time we get to talk, we have fun. There's no doubt. So ladies and gentlemen, I just, you know, I want you, by the way, tell us a little bit before we start, where can we find you? I'm going to put it all online, of course.
Sure. So my company's name is Social Espionage. You can find me, my first name, Dorothea, at Social Espionage. Again, SOCILIALESPIONAGE. But on everything from TikTok to Instagram to Twitter, I'm at Social Espionage. That's me on everything. And I would love to connect with your listeners. And I wanted to thank you again for the generous gift of your time. This was long overdue, the two of us getting together. And I hope this is the first of many. Because I know that between the two of us, we have a lot more to share, a lot more wisdom to share.
Absolutely. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's time to wind up today with Smart Conversations. We will see you next time. And, you know, we'll have Dorothea back because there's a lot more to talk about.